Hey everyone, Bojiro here again, and today I'm bringing up a topic that might make you feel a bit uncomfortable. Here's the question. Have you ever wondered if you are an alpha, a beta, or maybe that mysterious sigma who doesn't need anyone? You've probably seen this content somewhere, a YouTube video, an Instagram post, or a self-help book with a wolf on the cover. And maybe you were left with that feeling that you need to change something about yourself to climb this hierarchy. Well, before you buy any course or change your behavior based on this, it's worth knowing where this concept actually came from, because its origin is much stranger and far less solid than it seems. So I went digging, and the first thing I discovered is that the term alpha male isn't even 100 years old. If you plug alpha male into Google Ngram, a tool that tracks the frequency of words and books over time, you'll see the term only started gaining traction in the 60s and truly exploded from the 90s onward. In other words, it's a recent idea. It's not something humanity has always known or that science confirmed centuries ago. And the most interesting part is that every peak in popularity for this term was accompanied by an even greater distortion of the original concept. When you understand this history, it becomes easier to see why this whole thing is much flimsier than it appears. The term alpha, applied to social animals, gained momentum with a primatologist named Frans de Waal in his book Chimpanzee Politics, published in the 70s. He was studying a group of chimpanzees in a Dutch zoo and used the term alpha male to describe the highest status individual in the group, the one who had first access to food and other resources. The book was a hit, and the business and self-help worlds grabbed the concept and ran with it as if they understood everything. However, de Waal spent years afterwards saying that wasn't exactly what he meant, that the way people used the term was a gross simplification of what he had actually observed. The point everyone ignored in de Waal's book is that among chimpanzees, the highest status male didn't necessarily get there through physical force. He got there by playing politics. Chimpanzees form alliances, build coalitions, and cultivate relationships with other group members. The most successful alpha male de Waal described was a peacemaker, played with the infants, and knew how to relate well to others. Physical dominance does exist among them, but those who lead solely through force usually stay at the top for a short time and tend to fall through violence as well. It's not exactly the success model they sell you.
There's another detail self-help books conveniently ignore: the females. In chimpanzees, there is the alpha female who also holds high status and influences social dynamics. When you look at those alpha male book covers with that imposing wolf, you are probably looking at a female wolf, because in wild wolf packs, it is often the female who leads. The concept was built by ignoring half of the animals that were supposed to support it. That alone says a lot about the level of scientific seriousness behind this whole idea. Speaking of wolves, the other pillar of the alpha myth comes from a researcher named David Mech, who in 1970 published a book describing wolf hierarchies using terms like alpha and beta. The problem is that his observations were made on wolves in captivity, adult animals captured and forced together in an artificial situation. In 1999, Mech himself published an article explaining that what he had observed was not the natural behavior of wolves. In nature, wolf packs are families led by the breeding pair, with the pups following the parents. There is no dominance struggle. There is a family relationship. Mech spent years trying to get the original book out of circulation because of this. In nature, when food becomes scarce in a wolf pack, do you know who eats first? The youngest and most fragile pups. The parents, the supposed alphas, feed the little ones first. It is a relationship of care, not dominance. This is the opposite of what the alpha myth preaches, the idea that the strongest has privileged access to everything and the others get what's left. If you take the real behavior of the animals that support this concept and compare it to what is sold in books and videos, they are two completely different things. The distance between the science and the product sold based on it is massive. And speaking of animals science uses to talk about human behavior, there is one that almost never appears in this alpha conversation: the bonobo. The bonobo is as close to us evolutionarily as the common chimpanzee. Both are equally our relatives, but the bonobo has a completely different social structure. Among bonobos, females have very strong bonds with each other, and a male who tries to subjugate a female by force gets beaten by the other females who swarm him as a group. The highest status male among them isn't the strongest, he's the son of the alpha female. It is a matriarchal society where brute force solves nothing. What bonobos show is that even among our closest relatives, social behavior can be completely different from what the alpha myth describes. When someone uses chimpanzees to say that physical dominance is the natural order of things, they are ignoring that we have another equally close cousin that works in a totally different way. The The choice of which animal to use to support an argument about human behavior says more about what the person wants to prove than what science actually shows. You pick the convenient example and ignore what gets in the way of the narrative.
The very concept of dominance hierarchy among animals was first described in chickens by a Norwegian researcher named Thorleif Skjelderup Ebbe in 1921. That's where the term pecking order comes from. Every chicken knows which ones it can peck and which ones it will be pecked by. This is the most basic hierarchy of dominance in animal science. So when someone sells you the idea of the dominant alpha male as a model for you to follow, they are essentially telling you to behave like a chicken. It's not exactly the image they want to project, but it's the one that fits their description best. Now bring this to humans. Think of the hunter-gatherer groups that still exist today, which are the human groups closest to the way of life we had for hundreds of thousands of years. In these groups, leadership exists, but it isn't fixed on a single person. Different men and women take on leadership roles depending on the context, the activity, and the competence of each person. There isn't a permanent alpha boss bossing everyone around all the time. And most importantly, anyone who tries to dominate others through force in these groups is criticized, ridiculed, and often expelled. Dominant aggressiveness is not respected. It is collectively punished. In hunter-gatherer groups, those with more status, like a good hunter for example, don't use it to serve themselves first or impose their will. In fact, the opposite happens. Those with more prestige are the ones expected to be more generous, more cooperative, and to set an example. Status comes with responsibility to the group, not privilege over it. This is completely different from what the alpha myth preaches. And it makes sense when you realize that no individual, no matter how strong, is stronger than a united group that decides to get rid of them. Humans have an advantage that no other animal has on the same scale: the ability to organize in complex groups, share information, and distribute prestige based on reputation. You don't need to be physically dominant to have status in human society. You can have status by being competent, reliable, generous, knowledgeable, or by knowing how to solve problems. And unlike a hierarchy of force, prestige based on reputation is much more stable and much harder to topple. No one is going to wait for you to fall asleep to take you off the top if your status comes from who you are and what you know how to do. What women actually want. There is another big problem in this story that rarely appears in the conversation. Nobody went and asked women what they actually find attractive, because the dominant alpha myth was popularized in the 2000s mainly by the pickup artists movement, which sold the idea that adopting alpha behaviors would be the solution to attracting women. However, studies that actually looked at this reached very different conclusions. High-status men are seen as more attractive, that's true, but the characteristics women associate with that status are not dominance and aggression. What studies identified as attractive to women was the combination of assertiveness and care for others. Confidence and competence? Yes. Aggression and dominant personality? No. In fact, violence and demanding behavior appeared among the least attractive. So the package they sell as the way to be desirable, being tough, imposing, and not caring what others think, is basically the opposite of what the data shows. It's not a matter of opinion or guesswork. It's what research found when it actually went to investigate.
The ultimate irony in this whole story is that the concept of alpha, when applied correctly to the animals where it makes some sense, describes an individual who cares for the group, builds alliances, is popular among other members, and uses influence more than force. This is true for both chimpanzees, as DeWall described, and wild wolves, as Mech Leader corrected. The real concept is closer to a responsible father or an inspiring leader than a guy who intimidates everyone around him. But that version doesn't sell courses, doesn't drive engagement, and doesn't provide a simple answer for personal insecurity. The real problem with this concept is that it offers an easy answer to something complex. If you feel insecure, if you feel you don't have the recognition you deserve, if you feel things aren't going well in your relationships or social life, the idea that you just need to adopt a more dominant and imposing posture is seductive because it's simple. It doesn't require you to actually work on yourself, develop real skills, or build genuine relationships. It only requires you to change your posture and buy the solution they are selling. It's a shortcut that leads nowhere.
In the long run, what really works to gain status, be respected, and be attractive is much less glamorous than being an alpha male, but it's what the data shows. Cultivating good relationships, developing skills that bring real prestige, being reliable, and showing that you care about the people around you. There is nothing revolutionary about it, but it's what both anthropology and psychology point to when looking at what actually works among humans. And it's much closer to the real behavior of the animals people use to support the alpha myth than anything you'll find in a book on male dominance. At the end of the day, next time you see someone selling the idea that you need to be a dominant alpha to succeed, remember all this. Remember that the creators of the original terms regretted how they were used. Remember that the animals the concept came from don't work the way they describe. Remember that attraction studies don't confirm what they preach. And remember that the human groups that most resemble our natural state punish exactly those who try to dominate others through force. The alpha idea they sell isn't science, isn't nature, and isn't a solution. It's a product created to be sold to the insecure, and that product does not deliver what it promises. So, that's what I wanted to share today. And if you've made it this far, leave a comment about what you think regarding being an alpha male or a beta male. And don't forget to subscribe.